I think this is a real problem. A lot of people don't really figure out who they are before they get married. And as life happens, they need to figure it out afterwards, because when difficulties arise, you have to be you dealing with them in some way. Or you have two people that now have to learn how to actually have a real relationship. And if you don't know who you are and then you're figuring it out afterwards, there's a lot of change happening. Yeah. Change is fine. Change is wonderful. But the other person didn't marry that new person. They didn't sign up for this. And you have two people who are both developing and changing, often in different directions, because this is the first time they're actually sort of free enough to try to be themselves, and they're kind of trying to figure it out now. And the result is that they don't feel like they're in a relationship with somebody that they can be in a relationship with.
This episode was a long time coming. Elisheva sits down with Dr. Yosef Sokol, a clinical psychologist who we were connected to because he teaches at Turo, and he's put in years of research to help discover what's actually going on in the Orthodox community, why people secretly leave when they age, and perhaps the most important question that every person needs to ask themselves. I sat in the background for this conversation, and honestly, it is one of my personal favorites for That's an Issue. Thank you to this week's sponsors, Ohel and Lchaim Legacy. Here's the episode.
Hi, Elisheva is here, back with That's an Issue podcast. Today, I'm very excited to be speaking to Rabbi Dr. Professor Yosef Sokol. Thank you so much for joining us. Please tell us about yourself.
Pleasure to be here. That's a lot of Rabbi Dr. Professor. It sounds like a lot, and even just hearing that makes me a little bit like, okay, so what do I actually do? So I am a professor in Turo College, teach people how to become psychologists in this ID program. I'm also a researcher in the Department of Veteran Affairs, where I focus on veterans who are at risk for suicide and how to help them with that. And also I give shiurim often about psychotherapy and halacha, as for the rabbi part of it. I have smicha from Beis Yosef in Vardak.
Okay, it's a lot of hats you wear.
Does seem like a lot sometimes.
So you also are a researcher, right? You've researched a whole bunch of topics ranging from Jewish dating for marriage to treatments of suicidality. And it seems like a lot of your focus has been within Orthodox communities and specifically looking at the issue of people's identity as kind of a starting point for everything. We are, as let's say, an Orthodox Jewish community or group of communities, a relatively small segment of the tiny segment of the broader population. And yet we have a number of different labels within our groups to describe our backgrounds, our religious affiliations, our practices, and our culture. Could you speak to how some of these labels are used and what they mean to people? What are you seeing with this idea of identity and labels within, religious groups?
Sure. So identity is fascinating, and labels are so confusing sometimes. We all label each other. We label somebody's modern Orthodox, somebody's Yeshiva Orthodox, somebody is modern Orthodox, Machmir. We have millions of these labels. I remember actually doing a study where I tried to figure out how to put people into groups to figure out different categories. And my first step was, let's let them choose groups. And I ended up with 50, and I wasn't slowing down. And it just doesn't work.
50 groups among how many individuals?
I think there were 70 people, and they just had so many
Three Jews, four opinions,
exactly.
Right.
3 Jews, 8 types of Jews, And it wasn't working because you have to summarize people to put people into groups that you could do data analysis and research on.
Yeah.
I ended up just saying, there's 4 groups, you pick the one you want, and then you could write in anything else afterwards. But you have to pick a group that you fit into it. And the truth is that really, it's an oversimplification. There's a reason why people don't like putting themselves into groups. They like putting other people into groups, not themselves, because they know that they're way too complicated to fit into that. Mm-hmm. But we use that as a shorthand because you can't describe, how else do you talk about people? You can't, if you want to talk about...
Do we have to?
That's a fair question. Why do we talk about people?
I used to say the only reason to stick a label on yourself that way is when you're dating for marriage. And now that I have kids who are dating for marriage, I'm like, I don't even think it's really so helpful there either.
I guess in some ways it is, but in so many ways it's not.
Right.
I think there's a balance.
Of course,
it can be useful, but the way people use it is often not useful.
Sure. And also because of language is so subjective, when somebody calls me and asks for a reference, for a person they want to date or for work or whatever, I'm like, I don't really know who I'm talking to. So I don't know if my language means anything to you. It's all relative.
Yeah, these are like heuristics. It makes it easier, but then you get stuck in the heuristic and you forget that there's an actual human being that the label is really not getting at.
Yeah, it's very limited and limiting. So you got to take it with a very big salt shaker.
Yeah, and yet this is what we do, and this is kind of, and it leads to problems as we will get to moving on with identity, but this is what we do.
Yes. Okay. So one of the major like tasks or features of maturing into adulthood is that we try to differentiate. We try to figure out how much you want to retain or we want to retain from our family of origin, from what we were taught growing up, from our education, from the different institutions we've been exposed to, and the broader community where our, paradigms developed, how we grew up and how much to question versus to like refine and evolve from there. So how would you describe those differences between trying to, foster that, it's nice to have community, it's nice to have a sense of social belonging, but maybe there's sometimes too much conformity. Maybe people feel smothered by everybody's doing that, so I have to do it too. How could people look for that balance between trying to be, authentic and individual and true to themselves, and also really finding their people, or either staying within or finding their community so that you don't feel so isolated in who you are?
That is a wonderful and difficult question to answer. And I would say the first
I got it from your work.
The first step to answering that question is really asking that question.
Yeah.
If people ask themselves, how am I balancing these two? They're actually really doing well, because it shows that they are aware that there's a them that could either be conforming or be themselves, and where to put that line.
So like I think therefore I am, like a metacognition.
If you question your place, then you are standing somewhere to do that questioning, and you exist somewhere.
Congratulations, there's a self.
Yes. Hooray. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite end there, because we do need to find somewhere to stand and like consistently.
Mm-hmm.
Some things that help people is figuring out what's really important to them as unique individuals, and to what degree they're able to conform in other ways that don't stop them from being themselves. I'll give you an example. I remember at one point deciding that white shirts, blue shirts is totally meaningless. I can wear pink shirts for all I care. I'm going to dress however I think is important, because anything else is completely meaningless theologically. I was quite convinced of that, as teenagers can be very convinced of things. And
this was when you were a teenager in the yeshiva world.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I was very much part of the yeshiva system. I was in Torah Tamima at the time. And it would have been a little bit of a statement to come in with a pink shirt into Torah Tamima. And I realized that, yes, I could be individual in my clothing, but I'd so much more rather be individual in how I think.
Mm-hmm.
And if I look like everybody else, I'll actually have much more freedom in how I think. If I don't look like everybody else, I'll have to conform much more in how I think, so I'm part of this group at all. And that was me picking that I'd rather conform in looks than conform in my mind. And that was for me very important. Other people may have other things. They may find actually the way they present themselves is really important to who they are, and they are choosing to make that something that they're using. I mean, it's a psychology idea that we have what's something called idiosyncrasy credits, that we're able to, how unusual can you be, and you kind of use them up.
Yeah.
And but people need to figure out for them, what are the important things? Where are they going to, what battles to fight? And also, at the end of the day, they have to be okay with who they are.
Right.
They can't be so conforming that they don't feel like they are themselves in the group anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So you also brought up another piece, which I don't know if we need to go there, but I just want to acknowledge it. There's sort of the external conformity versus the internal, like your inner world, right? So it feels like in, let's say, the community that you were a part of, you would get more credibility, and you would feel more comfortable socially by conforming in a more image or external way. And then that would give you the liberty and the freedom to sort of develop your own internal identity and thoughts and opinions. Whereas for some people, it's more important to make that externalized statement, to say like, I don't fully identify with other people who look like me, right? I think is that what you were saying? Like,
yeah. And different people are allowed to be different there.
Right.
We don't all have to be the same exactly in that too.
Yeah. And I think also, as I'm hearing you describe your experience with this, is that, my own experience was I grew up in a I guess, culture or a community or micro group where individuality was more celebrated. So it was kind of like we were all a little weird. And that as we got older, we're like, okay, how do we figure out how to sort of merge into like the maturity of a fully baked adult? So yeah.
If you, I'm going to actually just, because I realized I didn't answer the second part of what you asked me before, is the balancing of really being part of a community.
Yeah.
And that is so important. I know actually a lot, for good or for bad, I know quite a few people who've left our system. And what they tell me they miss, some of them miss kind of the spirituality, the feeling of meaning. But what thing that they most tell me they miss is the community.
Yeah.
that other
hear
people,
that a lot.
yeah, that they're with other people care about them. They know that there's people who are like them around them.
Yeah.
And that's something that we have that's extraordinary, and we don't want to give that up.
Yeah.
We shouldn't overbalance on the sides of individuality, as important as that is, because community is what keeps us going in our life.
Yeah, one of the things that I happen to appreciate a lot, we're sitting right now in Hewlett in the 5 towns on Long Island. And I think something that is, I don't know if it's unique, but it's just a feature that I really like about our community or communities, is that there is a certain amount of permeability and diversity and fluidity within our like small geographic group. There's like a little, let's say even within just the Orthodox spectrum, you can meet people within one family who will identify and align with different institutions within the community that are very different in terms of like both the presentation, the externals, and the belief systems and how they practice. And I think, there's no perfect way to do that, but it is something that I appreciate about this. And I think that we are seeing more of that in other places too, as the communities grow in terms of population. Do you agree with that?
I think so. I think our community is moving in many different directions at once.
Yeah.
There are segments of our community that I think are becoming more and more rigid in identity.
Okay.
While other segments become more flexible.
Yeah. I guess at the extremes, that's always what happens.
Yeah. I mean,
Right.
maybe it depends on who you're hanging out with.
Sure.
But I certainly spend time with people that it seems to me at least that there's so little flexibility in who they consider themselves allowed to be. There's
Right.
so many, life ends up becoming like a checklist that they're keeping on checking box and box off, that there seems like there's so little. It's a wonderful checklist. I mean, if I had to create a checklist, maybe I would create that
It's not
exact
a bad
checklist. Yeah, it's a
checklist,
great
right,
checklist.
right.
But it's a checklist.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to like something that I think would build nicely on that. So it's not unusual, like you said, for young adults or actually people of any age to evolve, to change their minds, including sometimes changing the way their lifestyles, how they behave and practice, and even sometimes beliefs over time, because we learn new things, we're exposed to different people and to different ideas. And so on the one hand, that's great. We grow, we evolve, like we shouldn't be the same, at 30 and 40 and 50, right? But that can be tricky when it happens after people already get married and they've already established themselves, let's say in certain communities or certain affiliations with institutions, and their perspectives might deviate from where they establish, especially, let's say, with a partner. So what have you seen in, let's say, your research and your practice and your, conversations with different people about this, again, like I guess this tension or this balancing between, on the one hand, people having that flexibility and that humanity to just kind of evolve as we go along, learn new things and shift, but also maintain that groundedness and make space for what other commitments we had. And I guess the most serious commitment being the marital relationship.
I think this is a real problem. A lot of people don't really figure out who they are before they get married. And as life happens, they need to figure it out afterwards, because when difficulties arise, you have to be you dealing with them in some way, or you have two people that now have to learn how to actually have a real relationship. And if you don't know who you are and then you're figuring it out afterwards, there's a lot of change happening. Yeah. Change is fine. Change is wonderful. But the other person didn't marry that new person. They didn't sign up for this. And you have two people who are both developing and changing, often in different directions, because this is the first time they're actually sort of free enough to try to be themselves, and they're kind of trying to figure it out now. And the result is that they don't feel like they're in a relationship with somebody that they can be in a relationship with. I see a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah, I do too. I was thinking as you were saying that when my husband and I were dating, we were both only for sure 100% only going to marry someone who is like making Aliyah the next minute, like we were going to live in Israel right away. And we moved to Israel and we ended up living there for like about 6 years. So on the one hand, you could look back and say, okay, so it was like a little immature that we were so rigid, both of us, about like, no, I'm only going to date people who want to live in Israel. But on the other hand, it was helpful that we were on the same page of like, we definitely want to make it work in Israel. And then as we were living there and figuring out the different, factors of our lives that needed to be considered, then we together had to make that recognition that, okay, we're going to make this adjustment. Whereas sometimes I'm not saying that no one should ever marry someone who wants to live someplace different than them, but that's a pretty big compromise to make. And if one of us started out wanting to live there and the other one not, then that's a little harder, because then whoever gets their way, the other person, that I think that piece. So yeah, it is of course very helpful to concretize and crystallize who I am at, let's say, I don't know, getting married at 22, 25, at whatever age you are, but also who's the same at 25 and 45, right? Like even if you're really clear on who you are at 25, there's going to be shifting and changing over time anyway. So I guess there's like,
yeah, it's a really good point that on the one hand, people have done less figuring out who they are and what's really important to them by 20. And also, even when people do that, they continue to change. But I think there's like a difference. If you've already done some work, you're on a trajectory. The other person is marrying somebody who's on a trajectory. That trajectory can change. But it's that person who's on a trajectory. Like that you see how they develop. This is them developing. A lot of people, I feel like, aren't marrying a person. They're marrying like a checklist.
A concept.
A concept.
Yeah.
A
paradigm. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then if that person keeps on developing, it's not like that person developing, it's that actually person first becoming a person at all.
Okay, so I hear you. Meaning, like what you're saying is, let's say the example that I gave from my life is like you're dealing with, let's say, two adults who have maybe very strong feelings because they're like young and idealistic adults, but they thought this through, and then they're going to think things through again in another year, and another year, and another year. But what you're saying is a bigger problem is like when people haven't necessarily either had the luxury or taken the opportunity to think things all the way through. They're just kind of following through like a conveyor belt of like, well, that's what you do next. And then one or both of them wake up a year or 2 or 5 later and be like, wait, do I actually really want to be doing this?
Yeah. You mind if I give an example?
Please.
Somebody that I worked with. Somebody came to me for therapy and he had been in Kollel for a while and left Kollel, financial issues. And he was having a lot of both problems. What am I doing? Who am I now? My whole life, this is what I was going to do. Learn forever. And he also was having a lot of marital problems. And it wasn't coincidence. Like he was changing so much, and his wife had married a Kollel person, is now married to a not a Kollel person.
Just keep saying Kollel. Kollel is long-term Torah study.
Yeah. So that she had expected him to study Torah for a very long time, and he wasn't, and that kind of was difficult for her.
Yeah.
It was difficult not just because of the stress of the change, but also that he seemed to be a different person to her. And part of what helped him and her is figuring out that this actually was still him. Because when he had been studying Torah in Kollel, he actually had cared a lot about meaning, about connecting with God and trying to do things that matter to him. And now he was also doing that. It was just evolving. So helping them both see that this is an evolution rather than a clean break was actually what enabled them to keep going. If this was not an evolution, if he hadn't been learning in Kollel because he actually cared about it, I don't know how it would have helped them. It would have been a lot harder.
Yeah. So that's one example of how people's, like, let's say, lifestyles or trajectories shift over time. Another common thing, I think you touched on a little bit before, is that, let's say, when people get married and they're aligned, at least, let's say, in terms of their backgrounds or communities or where they think they're headed as far as observance and affiliation. And then one of them has, let's say, a crisis of faith and says, I don't really believe this anymore. I don't really want to practice it in this way anymore. So we see that not uncommon. That's something that happens a lot. So did you see anything in your research or in your practice that speaks to that? Do you have any thoughts on that particular, phenomenon?
Sure. So to start with, when I've seen that happen, it's actually not as sudden as people often make it seem.
Yeah.
I know so many people who are in the religious lifestyle who are very, let's call it, empty inside. Mm-hmm. They don't have a connection with Hashem in the sense they turn to Him when things are difficult. They ostensibly believe a lot of things. They certainly do a lot of things, but most of that isn't really them. And at some point, that gets too hard for them and they just decide, I don't want to do this anymore. When people in teenage years, it's often because they're not fitting in or issues happen. But that happens in the 20s and 30s too. And that's often more because it's kind of think of it as a very early midlife crisis. Like, is this really the life I want?
Yeah.
To be faking it all the time, to pretend to not actually be myself because I am acting out a religion that I don't really, really deep down make sense to me and believe. So yes, if people haven't dealt with that before they get married, it's not surprising it is dealt with after they get married. And the natural result is often that one of the two partners either leaves religion or doesn't leave officially, but leaves unofficially. And that's actually what I see even more. I see sometimes when somebody's officially not religious anymore and they're trying to make it work or not, get divorced. But even more often, I see people that their spouse figures out, oh, this person doesn't actually daven ever. They don't actually, on Shabbos, if behind closed doors, they'll turn on lights. And it becomes like an open secret in the house.
Yeah.
And when that happens, it's an enormous strain on marriages and children. And I've worked with people trying to figure out how to navigate that. In some ways, that's even harder because they still want to be part of the community. So it's not like it's easy for them. No direction is going to be easy for them, but struggling to figure out how to really create something that should have been created a very long time ago, or learn how to live without something that they really need, is a very hard place to be in. I don't, again, it's not like I have wonderful answers for that. These are things that need to be dealt with earlier on. And this is kind of a larger and more structural issue than I think any individual issue. But when this does happen, the core is, what I've seen is finding ways that they may be more or less religious than each other. And they often still have a reason why this is the person they chose to marry. And it has to do with connecting in values, connecting in even just a sense of humor, some way that there's still something real that they have. If you can build on that, that's often enough to find like somewhere to stand.
I hear you. I would maybe push back on that a little bit, because I've also worked with a lot of couples who have that kind of like divergence in that way. And I think that, yeah, sometimes it's just like sort of a praxis, something that people were doing just because, like, okay, I was doing the thing that I did in my family growing up, or in the schools that I went to, or the systems that I was a part of. And then the next step is to find someone who has similar, external trappings. For sure that happens. But what also sometimes happens is that you have people who, when they went through, let's say, the post-high school phase of, yeshiva, college, seminary, like that stage, they really did go through a very sincere iteration of idealism and, theological exploration or spiritual connection. And then something happens. Either they encounter something that's traumatic, a loss, an internal crisis, where it wasn't a passivity, it wasn't a laziness, it wasn't a negligence, but they just, they were exposed to something, whatever that exposure was, experiential, intellectual, personal, and I think you touched on something really important, is that it also depends how strong the foundation is of the relationship before. So if we're talking to people who didn't know each other so well before they get married, right? In certain segments of the population, the dating protocol is very quick. And so the idea is like, okay, you're not going to really form so much of a relationship until after you get married. Then it, I think, ends up, and again, how long have they been together before this deviation happens? So there's not as much of a strength to build on, like the foundation to build on. Whereas if people were together for a while, either prior to marriage and or after marriage, and they have that like emotional compatibility and personal connection, there sometimes we see that the relationship can tolerate a lot more of this divergence of beliefs and values and practices. Does that make sense based on what you've seen?
Definitely, yes. There are many things, unfortunately, that can go wrong.
Yeah.
And I guess I was thinking about the people I've worked with, but I've certainly have seen that too.
Yeah.
Different segments of the community, probably one happens more than the other.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, both are way too prevalent. And yeah.
And not always so preventable, I feel like.
Yeah.
Right. I think, again, like depending on how rigid a place we're starting with, right? Like I think there are some communities that give a little bit more flexibility for you to like explore these things individually and within the dating process. And there are some where it's like, there's not as much tolerance for that kind of individuation.
Yeah. And some of it is also that people don't know what to look for.
Mm-hmm.
They sometimes look for, again, talking about checkboxes, they'll look for things like how religious is somebody right now, without thinking about what is the story of their life and what this means to them, and like what's the long-term likelihood of this person being stable. If somebody makes rapid shifts, it takes time for it to become stable. And that's, unfortunately, if somebody, even if a shift in a wonderful direction is a shift.
Yeah.
And shifts are hard, and shifts often cause backlash.
So it almost sounds like you're talking about two extremes, right? Let's say like the big shift would be like a complete overhaul of a lifestyle. Let's say somebody who wasn't observant at all and becomes very religious. Or let's say the opposite, what you were saying earlier, is like someone who is born into a norm and they're just perpetuating the norm in a behavioral way, but not necessarily spiritual or theological or integrated, right?
Yes, exactly. Growth occurs in a healthy way when it's slow and developmental.
Right.
Rapid shifts aren't good, but also being stagnant isn't good. So
Right.
like, I remember somebody telling me that they feel like they're a robot following other robots. And like, yeah, a lot of people, there's know themselves, so it's all stagnant. On the flip side, some people will say that they rebel against everything that their parents raised them to be, to suddenly become very religious. That's also an enormous shift that, if not done very carefully and slowly and creating some continuity, is also can be very hard.
When you use the word religious, what do you mean?
So when I'm using the word religious, I'm using it for more the internal side.
Okay.
In the sense that when that rapid shift I'm talking about, I'm thinking of somebody completely overhauling their values
Okay.
and what they find meaning and purpose in, and how the world works for them.
Okay.
Yes, but you can also use that from the external side of their practices that they do and their dress and the community that they send their kids to. I don't know, the schools they send their kids to. It's all.
Because I feel like the word religious could be confusing.
Yes.
Right? Like there are, let's say, communities that you would point to and say, oh, those are very religious communities just based on the norms and presentations and restrictions and, kind of practices. But then when you speak to lots of individuals, you have like the same spectrum of like how much people believe in it versus not that you do in more diverse communities, I would think.
Definitely. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, the word religious is probably not the best word to use.
I didn't mean that cynically. I was just wondering. Right.
No, you're right. What's the best word? Is it? I don't like using the word spiritual or devout in this context. So I use the word religious, and yes, good check on that. That is,
Yeah, because I wasn't so much about like correcting as exploring, sort of like, people like to talk about religious versus spiritual. I mean, those are also abstractions.
Yeah. Because
and the practice versus the belief. And
there's something more enriched that Judaism, Yiddishkeit has that's not just spirituality. It's internal religiosity.
Yeah, the ritual has meaning for
the rituals are extraordinarily powerful and meaningful. And
well, they can be.
Can be, yes. And when they are, though, it's not. I think of it as transcending spirituality, which is why I like using the word religious. But you're right. For many people, religion is more of an external thing.
Yeah, and also sometimes it varies by practice. So, for example, I remember once somebody asked me to give a talk in a community about a specific mitzvah. And they said, because, why you're passionate about it. And I'm like, well, then you have the wrong person. I'm not passionate about that mitzvah. And she's like, well, what do you mean you do it? I'm like, right, I do it because I subscribe to the system. I read the literature. My understanding is that that's something that's part of my commitment to halacha. But if you want passion, then talk to somebody else. I can tell you sources, right? Yeah. And I think that's okay. Like, I don't feel apologetic about that. There's other things that I am inspired by. And I think that's also part of the broader framework for some people.
Yeah, I think that's one of the unique qualities of Judaism is that we have an entire system of practice that we can be passionate about having a system of practice without being passionate about each individual practice within it.
Yeah, yeah. And I also think that it's okay for people to say, like, I'm not even passionate about the broader system, but I've done my intellectual and theological, exploration, and I believe that this is my truth. And so I'll try to find fulfillment and, inspiration and passion within the micro, right? Like,
well, I'd wonder. I mean, you're certainly right if that person means that there is something that they find meaningful and passionate about within it.
Yeah.
But if there's nothing, and I'm just doing it because this is a system I'm supposed to follow.
Yeah.
That doesn't.
It's harder.
It's harder, and it often doesn't end so well.
Do you think everyone needs to be passionate
about something? I hope.
Okay.
I think without any passion in your life, eventually you find you have nothing pushing you to when things are difficult.
Okay.
What keeps us going when things are hard is not that we have we believe that this is what we're supposed to do. That keeps us going a little bit. But when we have a real reason why this matters to us, that's what helps us get through hard things. And passion should be somewhere.
Okay.
We'll be right back this week's episode. But first, I want to tell you about an organization that truly lives up to its name. Ohel. Of course, you know what it is. As many of you know, Ohel means tent in Hebrew, and this organization's mission is inspired by the tent of Avram Avinu, which was open on all four sides to welcome and support anyone who entered. And that's exactly what Ohel has been doing for our community for more than 50 years. Whether someone's struggling with mental health challenges, caring for a loved one with disabilities, facing addiction, family crisis, or just going through an overwhelming time, Ohel is there with compassionate professional support. Their doors and their hearts are always open. And now Ohel is expanding that support even further with the opening of the new Ohel Family Center in Hillcrest, Queens, including a behavioral health clinic that is already open and serving the community, and a day-hab program for individuals with developmental disabilities opening this September. It's all about making services more accessible and bringing care closer to home. If you or someone you know could use support, guidance, or simply a place to turn, Ohel is here for you. Visit ohelfamily.org or call 1-800-603-OHEL. Ohel, our tent is always open. And as a side point, someone asked me the other day, what are some of my personal Yaakov Linger's favorite organizations? And Ohel is there. They do so much. Everyone knows their doors are always open, and they are a proud partner of this podcast. And before we get back to this episode, and believe me, there's a lot of good stuff coming up, I want to share something that I think is very special. Imagine having a chance to preserve the voice, stories, and legacy of your loved ones forever. That's exactly what we're doing with our new service, Lchaim Legacy. I mean, it's not that new, but it's still new to many. Think of it as a deeply personal, in-depth version of Inspiration for the Nation, but focused entirely on the incredible journey of your family member. We recently had the honor of interviewing Mr. Goldstein, and now his family has his life story preserved forever. The feedback back nonstop gratitude. These stories aren't just interviews, they're treasures that capture the essence of life well lived to be passed down for generations. This exclusive service is now available on a first come, first served basis. So don't miss the chance to create a lasting legacy for your family. You can find out more at LchaimLegacy.com and give your loved ones the gift of forever. Of course, we could interview you. We can interview your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, anyone, and then it will be yours forever. So LchaimLegacy.com.
So we talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to frame the question a little bit differently. A lot of adults, like parents and educators, tend to reward that obedience, the compliance to do what you're supposed to do. But how could you tell the difference? Like if you're working with children, between the kids who are genuinely thriving within a particular system versus the ones who are just kind of like moving through the cog or the conveyor belt of going through the motions, but are not sort of going through that internal work of building up an identity, an inner self, a world where they can develop that integrity, passion, conviction, whatever you want to call it, but like that identity piece. Like it's, and I want to say, as I'm asking that question, is that obviously it's going to look different at age 5 than it does at age 12 and at 18, right? Like there's different, but I guess how can you tell? And also how can we foster? Like how can we, generate the kinds of homes and educational environments that will, challenge young people and people at different stages of life to do this.
And ourselves.
Yeah.
I'll start with, let's say, kids, children. The first thing is actually talk to them. I mean, it sounds like a silly thing to say, but I know so many parents, and I myself am very tempted to just go through life, with our kids, making sure they do what they're supposed to do. They do their homework, they're at the Shabbos table, they're participating. And how often do we have real conversations with them about what they care about and what matters to them and what doing mitzvahs actually means to them beyond just that they're supposed to be doing it. So the first is just be open to actually talking about it. That's the start.
Sounds like talking and listening.
Yes.
Not just talking at them, right?
I should have said discussing, perhaps. Talking with, not talking at. That's a very good point.
Well, that's what you illustrated, meaning you said talk to them, but then you gave examples of interaction.
I really mean ask and listen.
Okay.
And be open. That's the second part, is really being willing and open that they're not exactly fitting in.
Yeah.
And trying to respect that. And this is so hard for parents, and I have such deep empathy and sympathy for parents who want their children, they know what's best for their children. They know that if their children fitting in is actually what's going to be best for them in the long run. Are they correct? It's a separate question, but they are utterly confident in that. And so it's so hard for them if their children aren't quite fitting in the way that they want them to. So they don't ask because they don't want to know. But that doesn't work very well in the long run. So first ask, be willing to listen, even if it's not exactly what you want to hear.
Yeah.
And then how to foster it. That's already a good step. If you ask, you're willing to listen, and you're willing to respect the direction that they really want to go in. Then fostering just comes with actually giving them the opportunity to move in that direction in accord with the parents shouldn't give up their values. The parents should have values. And if it contradicts what the children's doing, the parents should, as a respectful person, talk to them about it. That doesn't mean just let your kid do whatever they want. That's actually terrible for them. It means within the system that you're in, find ways what are their actual strengths? If it's an analytical thinking, Gemara is wonderful for them. But if it's really not, then recognizing that and helping them to flourish in a Jewish, meaningful way that takes into account that they actually enjoy talking to people or art or whatever it may be, that goes a long way in helping them become themselves. And then when you see it, rewarding it. If you see that they don't have to be doing something and nobody's looking over their shoulder, they're on vacation. They're not at school. What are they doing when they're not?
Weekends.
Yeah. That's when you need to show. By reward, I don't mean give them things. We spend way too much time rewarding by giving
cultivate,
things.
yeah.
Cultivate by showing how much it means to you, how much you respect them because of who they are becoming, and not just because it's what their school wants them to do, but because you see that it matters to them. These are the types of things. I mean, I can go on and on forever, but this would be the type of thing that I think if you show them that it matters, you're willing to accept them for who they are. You're willing to help them become who they are, even if it's not exactly who you want them to be, who you are. That gives people the foundation to then grow into that.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess like parent the kids that you were given.
Yes. And it's so hard. And some of us haven't done it ourselves yet to begin with. So it's so scary too.
Yeah.
I certainly understand why it's hard. And also
So necessary.
So necessary. Look, we all want what's best for our kids. And the truth is,
what we think is best for our kids.
Well, we want what's really best for them. The problem is we are convinced that what we think is best for them is what's best for them. And the reality is none of us really know, but we can do our best.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such an important thing to remember. One of my kids recently, like it's a line that's going around in general, but she said to me, like, yeah, I know you're also just living life for the first time.
When kids start saying their lines back to us, we're in trouble.
It's true. It's true. As I was hearing you describe sort of that tension between what's often referred to as, let's say, permissive, authoritarian, and then that middle ground, authoritative education and parenting, I was thinking about, you're talking about it in that very specific framework of, let's say, Orthodox, values-based Jewish life. But I was also thinking about how in like the broader, let's say, American culture, we hear a lot about like neurodivergence, right? Like people who their minds and their social styles are like deviate from whatever we decided the norm is, right? And like you just hear so many people being, well, as a neurodivergent, I'm like, is anybody neurotypical anymore? And there's this celebration of individuality and sort of like being different that I think is like in general in the world. And so I think sometimes more community-oriented communities will kind of like pull back the other, you know what I mean? Like each extreme will pull and then the middle is trying to figure out its space.
Yeah, I have my own opinion about that kind of movement. Probably you share, but I think it's another version of labeling. People are trying to create other boxes for themselves.
That's
I'm neurodivergent. I am. Yeah. So I'm not in your big box, but I have now a nice, great little box that I can fit into and talk from. And that's also not who they are.
Right.
You're not a neurodivergent. You are a person who may have certain qualities. And that's
maybe we don't need the labels, right?
Exactly. All these labels I don't think really do us as much good as people. They make our life easier.
Yeah.
But easy isn't usually good.
Right. Right. And it's also about context. Like, am I using the label that I got as a reason to, like, sort of as an excuse or as an inspiration? Like, sort of what are we doing with that label?
If it helps me understand some things better, fine. But if I start using that as, because I am that, therefore I should do this, you've completely lost the point. Like, that's explanation doesn't lead to what one should do.
Right.
That's explanation explains what has happened, not what should happen.
It's not necessarily an imperative. It's just it's
what
descriptive.
It's descriptive, not doesn't mean what should happen.
Right.
So we all struggle with fundamentally the same things. I would also exactly in Chadash Hashem, there's nothing new under the sun. Yeah. And also I would say that in certain generations, specific issues come up in a particular way that make it more of a challenging. So in some ways, we have a less of a challenge with ideology than 100 years ago, the isms era, where the Haskalah movement, the intellectual enlightenment movement, we are in the outside intellectual universe is no longer as tantalizing for many people. However, culture is extraordinarily tempting. And part of, I think, why we have...
Sorry, are you distinguishing between academia and pop culture?
That's part of this.
Okay.
That people find the outside world in general attractive, even if it's not academia or intellectual. It wasn't really academia as much as just the idea of ideas. Ideas being so important.
Philosophy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Zionism 100 years ago was, the wars were fought literally over Zionism. Like that's, and within the Jewish world too.
Right.
And nowadays, people don't seem to be as passionate about ideas as they used to be.
Okay.
However, we are within a very accepting culture in America, probably among the most accepting cultures that we have been in a Jewish nation for a long time, which comes with perils. It is wonderful and also means that it's much easier to assimilate. So our community, I think, has developed an immune system. When we're under attack, we fight back. And the way I think our community has fought back against that assimilation turned, the reason we have been so successful in America as a community, it's amazing. The growth we've had, the stability, it's just wonderful. And, like if somebody's sick and they have a fever, the fever's great. It knocks out whatever it is. And that's also a problem. So I think we have developed this immune system of conformity, of we are ourselves, it's us, them. It's the outside world. We are so much exactly the same because we're all doing the same thing. So it protects us against the outside world. I get it. I understand why.
When you say the outside world, do you mean like the broader secular culture?
All of the we are a box. The outside that box is scary and tempting. And we are worried that not only us, but other people will leave because we're in a very accepting culture. And America is wonderful.
Yeah.
And at least this is my view. Not saying
Yeah,
this
I
is
feel like you're describing a very insular segment of the population. And I'm sort of picturing concentric circles where there's like more and more permeability as you kind of move out of that nucleus of insularity. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. Well, I'm coming from a yeshiva Orthodox world.
Yes,
so it's kind of,
yes.
and the people I work with, a lot of them.
I'm picturing kids who go to Binghamton and go to
Mhm.
Maryland, you know, for university. And then like there's definitely like sort of a slipping away of certain of those Orthodox trappings and norms. And like there's definitely a lot of that going on too. But you're speaking to like that I guess like core group of the insularity that is burgeoning, I guess.
Yes, and I see,
Yeah.
at least in my view, there's more conformity among the more insular
Sure.
group.
Yes,
And
yes,
I
as
see
there
them
usually
as-
is. Yeah.
And I would say, look, I don't want to point fingers. Every community has its strengths and weaknesses. And I think
Yeah.
that the communities that are less insular and less conformist
Yeah.
also have more people leaving. Like it's not.
Yeah. That's what it is. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So again, I'm not saying this is not about good or bad. This is that we have developed in this way.
Yeah.
And I see that there's an issue as a result that we need to deal with. The fact that it developed in this way for a good reason. And I'm sure there's Hashem had something in mind here in our developmental process. I don't think anything happens in Klal Yisrael's development without there being a reason for it.
Sure.
And that doesn't mean that we aren't, as Klal Yisrael, supposed to be doing something about that to prevent the harm. Because conformity, this system that we have where people are fitting in boxes and are not themselves, and when something goes wrong, they fall apart, it's a real problem. And I think we need to do better at that.
Okay. So the problem that you're identifying is that if on the macro, we've cultivated this like communal protection against disappearing into the broader culture, but then at the micro, individually, people's identity is maybe suffering. Like there's not as much space to cultivate an individual identity and trying to create more space for that within.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Overall, yes, we need this, but for specific people, as you're saying, the micro level, but
Yeah.
also I'd even say the macro of the micro. How do we do our education systems?
Yeah.
How do we treat people in our community? Yes, the overall structure, this is helpful, but when we actually interact with people, we need to be helping them. And this part of that, I think, is helping them be themselves and develop who they are within the system, not just be the system.
Got it. Okay. So you have done a lot of like clinical research, right? Particularly about severe mental health struggles and suicide. Like till now, we've been talking more about like the general population, but you also looked at, specifically people who are suffering, more seriously. And you wrote about something called cross-temporal identity and future self-continuity. These are very elegant terms. And this it's in your approach to addressing suicidality. But could you tell us a little bit about what that means, like in simple language?
Sure. So who we are, like you kind of have a sense, hopefully we all have a sense of who we are right now, or we can get better at that, but we have some sense of who we are.
Who are you?
Yeah. Well, maybe I don't know that, but I have some sense. And that doesn't mean that we have a good sense of who were in the past and the future. Some of us do.
Yeah.
Some of us have this clear sense, I am now, I was in the past, this is who I was when I was a kid, and this is who I will be when I am in the future. And they have a sense that this is me over time that I'm developing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what very healthy people have.
Like a past, present, and future vision of self.
Exactly.
Okay.
There's one story over time that this is me over time.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out that when people have that, they are so much more resilient in their life. They do so much better. When people have the sense that I have a story with a future that I'm moving towards, that is me, that I can work towards, when bad things happen to them, they just do better. Like I have one study did when people lost their job or they left the military, which is surprisingly challenging when people do that.
Sure.
And when people had this sense of a future that they like and they're moving towards, they did not get more depressed. People didn't have that, they did get more depressed. Almost like it was like a very clear division.
It's like man's search for meaning, right? The
Exactly.
logotherapy, right? If you have a why, then you figure out the how.
Yeah, and people's
Right.
why
Yeah.
is usually the future.
Mhm.
We don't do things because of right now, the big things. We do things because I want something to happen in the future.
Goal-oriented.
Goals.
Yeah, yeah.
The whys are the future. So if you don't have a future, then why do things?
Right.
And if you lose your job and you don't have a sense that I'm working towards a future where I'm going to have some meaning and do something with my life, then you fall apart.
That I could get a new job or right,
Exactly.
right.
That future me that gets a new job, is it you? If it's not you, then you're stuck
Then
in
you're
the present.
detached from the possibility. I remember
Exactly.
once hearing Dr. Tal Ben-Shachar describe depression as sadness without hope. I feel like
Mhm.
that's kind of what you're saying. Like the hope is the idea of a better future.
And and I just to add, it's not just that there could be one, but that it's you that's having it. It's real, it's meaningful, like it's an extension of you.
Like you're there. You're the main
Yeah.
character of your own future.
Also, what I often happen when I talk to people who are suicidal or have different issues,
Yeah.
they'll have a very hard time talking about their future. When they do describe it, sometimes it's positive.
Yeah.
But they don't feel
They don't
it's real.
connect to it
They don't
personally.
connect
Yeah.
to it. It doesn't match onto them.
Like that's somebody else.
Exactly. And if it's somebody else that's doing better, it doesn't mean anything to me.
There's a line that the kids sometimes say, it's like, oh, that's a problem for future me.
Yes.
Right? Like
So this is everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody is more or less of this, how much you connect to your
Yeah.
future. But when people don't have that in a problematic way and hard things happen, it's much worse for them in their way to deal with it.
Sure.
And this goes back to our identity question.
Yeah.
When people have a sense of who they are from the past to the present, they've built up, this is what I do, that my choices have made me who I am. It's much easier for them to have that future self, to build into the future.
So that continuity, that like, that's who I was, this is who I am now, that's who I can be in the future. And we don't have to be ruptured from the past. Even if I don't agree with my past self, it's like, but that's how I got to be this version of me.
Exactly. If we have this story that we're developing over time, then we can extend it into the future.
Yeah.
If we don't, it's very harder. So this is why I think one of the reasons in our community, going back to that issue, is that when people haven't built that up, then when hard things happen after they get married, as we were talking about, or it's just much harder. They don't have that future self because they haven't been, it's hard for them to project into the future if they've never developed.
They're on autopilot. Right.
Yeah.
So to pivot a little bit, you also researched Orthodox dating, and specifically you addressed what a lot of people colloquially and also controversially refer to as the shidduch crisis, meaning like the different struggles and frustrations that some people encounter when they're dating for marriage in, different matchmaking systems. So a lot of people have armchair hypotheses for like what's really happening or who or what's to blame for this experience. But I'm wondering if you could offer, a little bit more data-driven like thoughts about, just like what you see and, how to address that, especially let's say you're speaking to young adults who are dating or about to start dating for marriage. Like from what you've seen, like what advice do you give? What thoughts do you have on, is there a shidduch crisis? And I know it probably deserves another couple of hours of its own, but.
Yeah, I probably can't answer all of that immediately.
Yeah.
But I'll give you the brief thing that I've learned from this at least. Yeah. Is there a shidduch? Are people struggling? 100%. There is a shidduch crisis that people are struggling and not getting married who want to get married. But is there that, let's call it
is that a crisis?
Well, I wouldn't even say that.
Yeah.
Is it if people are suffering, I call it a crisis.
Okay, fair.
But is it a crisis in the sense that there are people who will never be able to get married because the numbers don't work out? My research did not support that. It looks like the numbers over time work out because by the age of 40, which is as far as my study went, I mean, it kept it, not that it stopped there, but at the age of 40 already, 96% of men and 94% of women were married. And that's over time, more and more were getting married. The problem was that it took a very long time for people to get married who wanted to get married much earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So they were kind of stuck in this place of singlehood, which is a very challenging experience, especially in our community. Again, don't like pointing fingers, but our community has made being a single something that is pejorative, as though there's something wrong with people, or they're not an adult yet because they don't have a sheitel. For men, it's a talis. By the way, it's a thing in men, and go to shul, and single guys who don't have a talis, and they're called to no,
there's a very real embarrassment here. Yeah. Yes.
And again, I don't want to downplay that. That is a real suffering they have.
Yeah.
Especially, I would actually add men, because the community has so focused on the plight of women, which I understand. It's very painful.
Women also, I think, tend to gather around each other around that.
So they get more support. I have a lot of men who have told me they feel like they're invisible. Yeah. They're not married, and it's as though they don't exist. The problem is them, because if there's a shidduch crisis because there's so many women not married, the fact that they're not married is obviously something wrong with them.
Like you're the problem because there's so many women that you could marry, right?
And the reality is, if you actually look at the numbers, it's pretty parallel. Once you hit 30, the percentage of men and women who are not married are very approximately the same.
So interesting. Okay. And that's not what the word on the street is, but that's what you're seeing in terms of your numbers.
So this is what I would like to, the message that I would have is that people who are single continue to get married. And this is one of the things that it was difficult. Anybody who's done any communal work, or actually just never tried to help anybody, probably knows that it's usually a thankless job. And you will often have people who are upset that you tried to help with, again, human nature. Not judging. It makes sense, because I mean, if they need your help, that means they're vulnerable. They needed help. People don't like being vulnerable. Doesn't feel good. Yeah. So you have to help people, even knowing that you're probably
no good deed goes unpunished.
Exactly. It's part of it. And it's part of what you get into knowing it. And I did get that. Obviously, people who are. I got a lot of angry phone calls and people saying you don't understand what people are going through. You're
invalidating my experience. Yes.
But I actually wasn't their experience. This was something that was so meaningful to me that I got a lot of single men and women reaching out to me and say somebody cares enough to do this, to look
research,
into it.
Yeah.
And also there's hope that, one of my wife's friends who was single for a while, we keep on calling her and telling her somebody else got married who was older. And I keep on thinking that Yosef's study, this is what it found. People keep on getting married. I can still get married. And actually, there was we had this a question. We said people can write in whatever they want after the official survey. And 1,000 people, a lot wrote in things. A lot of people wanted to write and express because again, people don't feel like they're being heard. Whatever this issue is a huge issue and their own voice is not being heard. And some of them thanked us for doing it or said it was meaningful. And we collected all of them. We printed it out and all of us kept it on our wall. There's actual people that this is hopefully going to help. And this is a hard thing to do, but is it helpful? I don't know, but at least there were people who thought it might be helpful.
Listen, like you said, to be considered makes a difference.
Yes.
To know that someone cares enough to figure out, let's do the study to find out if there are solutions, even if we didn't get to the solutions yet, at least to understand what we're dealing with.
What is exactly? At first, this is if you want to know how to help, first thing you got to figure out is what is going on.
Right.
And that's kind of what we were trying to do. And people thought what is going on means that somebody's actually wants what's going on for them to know. So they're not invisible.
I just had a question that, I don't know if this is too off topic, you could tell me, but when you were describing the phenomenon of young adults who either didn't have the opportunity or weren't encouraged or didn't take the time to find themselves as far as that identity, do you see a difference in gender with different communities? Because I'm thinking about men's and women's education or boys and girls education at that level in religious communities and from communities, let's say. I feel like the education for girls offers a little bit more of that than for guys. You disagree? I guess depends on the institutions, but
yes, it's not. There's no we're not a monolith. Each institution is different.
Yeah,
there's some girls' schools that I think are much better at that. There are some few boys' schools that are good at that too. I'm not going to call out names because I don't want to be saying other people
I
aren't.
didn't mean that. I meant let's say the seminary model versus the yeshiva model. There's so much more diversity of exposure and learning for the girls than there is for the guys.
I wish I could say I agreed with that.
You don't have to.
Yeah, I actually find that a lot of people feel that the seminary experience is supposed to be molding them into something very specific. They often don't like that so much.
I hear you. Okay.
So again, there's different communities. We're talking about a very diverse community as a whole.
Yes.
But at least the people I've talked to and the experience that many people have is that maybe the box looks more complicated from the outside.
Okay.
And has different shapes in different ways, but it's still a very rigid box.
Right. I guess I'm just thinking I wouldn't want to have to learn Gemara for 8-9 hours a day. I'm so grateful that my institutionalized Torah learning was machshava and halacha and navi and
I really enjoyed learning Gemara. I also enjoyed learning Jewish philosophy, and I found that my system was really encouraged me to do the former and a little less do the latter. So I had to do that on my own time.
You figure it out, right?
And that's also a point that we can look within our system and see what does match with us, and kind of use our system to develop that side of ourselves too.
Right, and that's also you were saying before about encouraging institutions to offer a little bit more flexibility with those things.
I remember that a story from Yaakov Kamenetsky, he would talk about during Ben Azmanim, during vacation, what are people doing? And people would say they're trying to get their children to do that, to do similar things as they were doing in yeshiva because it's so important to be doing the same things. And he said, you're doing terrible things to your children. This is when they're supposed to be learning what they find interesting. Actually, still maybe intellectual exploration, but it could be, it's not negative things that they're going, but it's them finding things that interest them. It's the time that they're actually, and even in our very rigid system, there are some times that we can do things that interest us, and we need to take advantage of those.
What kind of things do you think Rabbi Yaakov would have wanted the kids to be doing on vacation?
Oh, he read science. He was very interested in science when he was a teenager. So I think my guess is he probably wouldn't have minded Tanakh. He said specifically, I remember mentioning Tanakh.
Okay, guys, your extracurricular activities are science and Tanakh.
I don't know. I'm not saying that he would say that for everybody. That's kind of, I know that he enjoyed those things.
You want to branch out from your scholastics.
But I remember that's really the Slobodka approach that he came from, was the Alter Slobodka wanted people to branch out in their own way, but also if they went too far in their own way was to kind of come back and make sure they spent enough time on the standard material well,
like
which
the
is
Shvil HaZahav kind of thing. Yes. Okay. So when a person is going back to the research that you've done on depression and suicidality, what are some of the things that you found to be helpful versus unhelpful to say as a professional, but also just for people, if someone is going through a rough time?
This reminds me of when people are Menachem Avel, and this somehow people know it there. You're not supposed to be talking so much. It's not about you talking. It's about you listening, about you being there.
Yeah.
This is the same thing. When people are in pain, it's not as much. Generally, the less you say, the better. So long as you're really with them in their pain and being accepting that it's okay for them to be in pain and it's not bad that they're in pain.
Right.
What you actually say, so long as you're not invalidating, is often less important. However, avoid things that are invalidating, like things like one thing that I have a personal peeve about is Gamzu Latova. Yes, on some very high level, Rabbi Kiva knew that everything is for good, but that's not what weird people are holding, and we tell them that it's judgmental. You should be aware this is good for you.
Right.
No, this is not.
They call that toxic positivity,
Yes,
right? The
exactly.
spiritual bypass.
So
you can't
that-
put a silver lining on somebody else's cloud.
Yeah. Like this reminds something that reminds me of like imagine if like a delicious piece of cake and you just that gets very spoiled though. But I'm gonna make it taste better. I smear some delicious topping on top on top. Like they're a terrible experience right now.
Yeah.
Slathering on something that tastes good on top is just gonna make it worse.
Right.
So don't try to make it better right now. Try to let them be in their pain. And over time, if you're with them, that could start creating the flexibility that they could explore that there might be some things in the future that may be helpful. But
So
that's
just show up.
Yeah, showing up. It's in some ways it's the hardest thing for us to do, to not talk, to be silent, to show up and not make things better. And maybe men have a bit of a weakness in that area. We'd like to fix things. And the reality is though, you can't fix other people's pain. They're in pain. Eventually you can help them when they're ready to be moving forward.
It's hard because like when you're paying a Shiva call, so I think most people, or at least many people know that your job is to just sit there and not say anything. But I think when you're reaching out to a friend who's suffering, you can't just like send a text message with no text or pick up the phone and be like, hi.
You could just say, I'm here if you want to talk. You want to, can we get together for a coffee at some point? I want to hear how you're doing.
I feel like Jews bringing food is our love language, right? Like just
We're
show
good
up
at
with some soup. And
We're good at the food thing. We've got that down.
remember we was going through something, we had an illness in the family. Thank God everyone's okay now. But we just like the amount of 9x13 pans that were in our fridge.
And that's, whether or not you needed all that food.
It was the love. It was a lot of love.
You have a lot of people who care about you. That requires a little bit of reflection,
right,
but yes.
Right. We try to do better. You wrote a book where you sort of merged your expertises of, the psycho-spiritual dimension and the psycho and the spiritual dimensions. Do you want to talk a little bit about your book, about your work, and then anything else that, we didn't talk about yet that you want to say before we wind down?
Sure. So the book that I wrote called Becoming Godly is really about what we're talking about. It's like, how can we develop as a unique individual? How do we become something? And it turns out that what I understand from the Torah review of that, of trying to emulate Hashem, trying to become, in some sense, following Hashem in this world, that he is a being that was not created. He's independent. And us, we can try to emulate that and be good in this world independently. Also uncoincidentally connects with what psychology shows is healthy development and ways to find meaning and purpose. Identity development comes through what the Torah is actually asking us to do. I just think that most people aren't aware that the Torah is asking us to do these things. So I wrote a book trying to show that how this works, this model, this way that what we are supposed to do according to the Torah, to what is our purpose for being here, according to what Ramchal says and many other people, perfectly aligns with what healthy being in this world, identity development, finding meaning, finding purpose, knowing who you are and who you want to become and becoming that. Both of those are really on a deep level, different languages talking about the same thing. Hashem created the human mind, and therefore the human mind works in certain ways that we can see. I wrote a book because I saw the problem that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
That people feel shallow. They feel like there's so much materialism. And yes, you can talk about Torah Gedula, but the only time there was that source that talks about was with Rav Yehuda Nasi. And it says that he wasn't Nana from this world. He didn't enjoy this world. That's the non-Torah greatness in the world, that of wealth that the Torah is respecting. And it's a shame we should strive for. But I see so many people who are living a life that it's very hard for me to see how it's deeply integrated into what the Torah wants us. And what can I do about that? I don't know. But I can write something to show that deep down underneath, if we are living Torah life, if we are doing what Hashem really wants us to do, then we will have meaning. And we do not need to turn to the secular world. We do not need to turn to materialism to make our life exciting and meaningful. We have that if we live our life in the way the Torah wants us to do. And this is not just me. This is what I'm talking about in some new language, but these are old ideas. This is what the Bali Musar said when they wrote Mesilas Yesharim too. I'm just using new techniques or identity language or philosophical ideas. But it's not me that is saying the Torah wants us. This is what everybody has been saying, that we just need to take seriously.
I remember once reading a book on self-esteem and thinking it was a secular book and thinking that the things that were being presented as the framework for self-esteem were very parallel to what I had always learned about the concept of soul. That everybody has like a core value as a human being because you have a soul. You have your like you said, you're godly. Like there's something about like I suppose maybe there's a bias because we both grew up religious, but like, and I'm sure, and I don't mean to say that people who don't have religion don't have meaning in their lives. I don't subscribe to that. And I think that you could be religious, even internally and theological, and still struggle with existential angst. But I think that there is something else that's being worshipped otherwise, whatever that is, right? Like purpose or goals or, morality, whatever that looks like. And having a framework is very, very helpful.
It gives us a way to think about the world in which we can be integrated because it all is one system that makes sense to us.
Yeah. And as you were talking about like the future self, so I think in that context, you were talking about a future self physically, right? Like moving forward in life, but like the future of beyond this world even is something that I think, is part of the broader, psycho-spiritual framework that we lead our lives with of just.
Yeah. And as a nation, the future of Mashiach.
Continuity, right?
The idea that there's this existence that we have that extends beyond ourselves is extraordinarily powerful for us. And if we're able to make that who we are, that gives us the ability. We have been like, when Jews are in trouble, we know we have been through so much.
Yeah.
We can probably get through this too.
It's like a transcendence. Yeah.
Yes, we can transcend this present moment because we have this beautiful, enormous story of over time that we have excelled and prospered internally, even in such terrible and horrible times. So yes, we can do that.
Okay. Is there anything that we didn't touch on yet that you want to add before we wind down?
Sure. So one thing I want to make explicit that we've talked about many problems. I want to make two things explicit, I should say. One, there's so many good things too. There's so many wonderful things. We can talk about problems because we are willing. Part of what makes us, I think, a wonderful nation is that we're open to and willing to look at our problems. You see, in Tanakh, it talks about all the problems that unbelievable people had. We can do that too. And two, we actually can do things about this. If we educate people, if people want this when they're young. I have a psychotherapy that I've developed to help people with this. And the most common question I get is, how come this isn't taught when we're in kindergarten and first grade? There's such things that we need to know about who we are and what we're doing with our life. And I tell them because they wouldn't necessarily, through your struggles, you're now able to do this in a way that you couldn't have before. But the truth is, we also should be doing this earlier on. There are things we can do. Just because these are entrenched problems doesn't mean that we can do better.
And I think some places are doing them. Yes. I don't know if you have kids or how old they are, but I feel like what I'm seeing happening in the younger schools and school systems is really nice, like what's developing. And there seems to be a lot of improvement in that area, the social emotional programming and things like that. Are you seeing that?
I see that somewhat. And it's definitely the case that there are people working on this, and we need to see them, encourage them, and go along with them and support them.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode. We actually have another episode of That's an Issue coming out very soon. We delve into prepping our kids for camps and how to properly educate them on the dangers of the world. And if you made it this far, you know that our episodes are the beginning of a conversation, and we adore your replies. Leave a comment with your thoughts if you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify, or you can send us an email if you feel more comfortable. We're hi@livinglchaim.com. That's HI. And I know we won't solve the world's problems here, but we can definitely talk about the challenges and let people know that there are resources and people who care. Thanks again to our friends at Ohel and Lchaim Legacy. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do. We have so much more to come, and we want you to get it first. Lchaim, and stay safe.
Living Lchaim.